1,921 career points. Second in NHL history, behind only Wayne Gretzky. Let that sink in. In the entire 100-plus-year history of the National Hockey League, only one man, the Great One himself, scored more. Not Gordie Howe, not Mario Lemieux, not Marc Messier, Jaromir Jagr. He won 5 Art Ross trophies as the league's leading scorer. He won the Hart Trophy as the NHL's most valuable player. He won 2 Stanley Cups. He won an Olympic gold medal. He played 24 NHL seasons across 9 different franchises, and when it was over, when the NHL could no longer contain him, he went home and kept playing. At 54 years old, Jaromir Jagr was still lacing up his skates for his hometown club in the Czech Republic, having completed 37 professional seasons, the longest playing career in the history of professional ice hockey. He scored 135 game-winning goals, more than any player who has ever lived. He scored 30 or more goals in 15 consecutive seasons, tying an NHL record. He recorded 201 points in 208 Stanley Cup playoff games, and he did it all, number 68 on his back. A number that had nothing to do with hockey, and everything to do with the history of a country that tried to steal his family's freedom. So how good was Jagr actually? Jaromir Jagr was born on February 15, 1972, in Kladno, Czechoslovakia, an industrial city 30 kilometers west of Prague, defined by steel mills, hockey rinks, and communist rule. His grandfather, also named Jaromir, was a farmer whose lands were seized by the communist government after the 1948 takeover. He was imprisoned for opposing the collectivization of his farm and forced to work without pay on the fields his family had run for generations. He died in prison in 1968. The same year, Soviet tanks rolled into Prague to crush the democratic reforms of the Prague Spring. Young Jaromir never met his grandfather, but he carried his name, his defiance, and the year of his death on his back for the rest of his life. The number 68 was never about hockey. It was a political statement sewn into a jersey, a tribute to a man destroyed by a system his grandson would spend his entire career defying. As a teenager in communist Czechoslovakia, Jagr kept a photograph of American President Ronald Reagan inside his school gradebook as a protest against Soviet policies. In a country where the government controlled every aspect of life, including who could leave and who could not, that was an act of quiet rebellion. Jagr began skating at 3 years old and showed extraordinary abilities almost immediately. By 8, he was playing multiple games every weekend. By 15, he was competing at the highest level of Czechoslovak hockey for Poldi ONP Kladno, his hometown club. By 17, he was the youngest member of the national team. His combination of size, 6 feet 2 and over 100 pounds, skating speed, and an almost supernatural ability to protect the puck made him unlike any prospect his country had ever produced. Then the Iron Curtain fell, and everything changed. In 1990, the Pittsburgh Penguins selected Jagr with the 5th overall pick in the NHL entry draft. He was the first Czechoslovak player in history to be drafted without having to defect to the West. Previous generations of Czech hockey stars had been forced to sneak across borders, leaving families behind and risking imprisonment to play in North America. Jagr walked through the front door with his government's blessing. When he arrived in Pittsburgh, he was 18 years old and barely spoke English. He moved in with the Nemec family, Czech immigrants who had themselves fled Czechoslovakia after the 1968 Soviet invasion. The irony was staggering. The number on his jersey honored the year his host family had escaped. Jagr was homesick, lonely, and overwhelmed. He played Scrabble to learn English vocabulary. He read weather forecasts on a local Pittsburgh radio station in his thick Czech accent, which delighted fans. He went on a 16-game goalless drought in the early part of his rookie season. Then the Penguins traded for fellow Czech veteran Jiří Hrdina, and everything clicked. Hrdina, nicknamed Jagr's Czechmate, served as a mentor and translator easing the teenagers' transition into the fastest, most physical hockey league on earth. Some Penguins fans noticed that the letters in Jaromir's first name could be rearranged to spell Mario Jr., a reference to the man he was now playing alongside, Mario Lemieux, the most gifted hockey player of his generation. Jagr did not just join the Penguins, he joined the court of a king. And the king recognized what he had immediately. Jagr finished his rookie season with 27 goals and 30 assists, third among all NHL rookies, and was named to the All-Rookie team. But the real story of that first year was not the regular season, it was the playoffs. The Penguins had acquired Ron Francis and Ulf Samuelsson in a franchise-altering deadline deal. Lemieux returned from back surgery, and Pittsburgh went on a run that culminated in the franchise's first-ever Stanley Cup championship, sweeping the Minnesota North Stars in the final. Jagr contributed 13 points in the postseason, 3 goals and 10 assists, including key moments that announced to the hockey world, this 18-year-old was not a passenger, he was a weapon. His coach during part of that rookie seasons was Scotty Bowman, who told Sports Illustrated, "He's a different player than the league has seen in a long time. His skating style and strength make him almost impossible to stop one-on-one. A lot of big guys play with their sticks tight to their bodies and don't use that reach to their advantage like Jaromir does." Back at the Nemec house, the family was sending VHS tapes of every game back to Kladno so Jagr's parents could follow their son's progress. Fans had discovered the address from a newspaper article and were showing up on the front porch, hoping to catch a glimpse of the young Penguin. The shy, homesick teenager was becoming a genuine star. In his second season, Jagr's numbers jumped to 32 goals and 37 assists. Then came the 1992 playoffs, and the moment when Mario Lemieux's understudy stepped into the spotlight. In the Patrick Division Finals against the New York Rangers, Lemieux suffered a broken wrist during Game 2. The Rangers were a formidable opponent, a veteran-laden squad expected to advance. Without their franchise player, the Penguins needed someone to seize the moment. Jagr did not hesitate. He scored a game-winning goal on a penalty shot in Game 5. At 20 years old, with his team's season hanging in the balance, he beat a goaltender one-on-one with the entire hockey world watching. He finished the playoffs with 24 points, including 11 goals and 4 game winners, carrying the Penguins through 3 rounds and into a second consecutive Stanley Cup championship. He was one of the youngest players in NHL history to score a goal in a Stanley Cup final. 2 rings before his 21st birthday, and this was only the beginning, with Lemieux battling back problems and Hodgkins lymphoma, a form of cancer that forced him to miss the entire 1994-95 season. Jagr stepped into the void and became the best player in hockey. The pressure was immense. Lemieux had been Pittsburgh's identity, its heartbeat, its reason for relevance. Without him, the franchise needed someone else to carry the weight of an entire city's expectations. Jagr did not just carry it, he sprinted with it. He won his first Art Ross trophy that shortened season, tying Eric Lindros with 70 points, but winning the title on the strength of his 32 goals to Lindros' 29. He was the first European-born player to ever lead the NHL in scoring, a milestone that echoed across the Atlantic and announced that European hockey had arrived as a permanent force in the sport. The following season, 1995-96, Jagr erupted with a campaign that still takes your breath away. 62 goals, 87 assists, 149 points. It was the highest single-season point total ever recorded by a European-born player, and the most points anyone not named Gretzky or Lemieux had scored in a season since Phil Esposito in the early 70s. The 87 assists and 149 points remain all-time NHL records for a right winger, records that have stood for 3 decades and show no signs of being threatened. He was 24 years old, and he was playing the position of right wing, at a level that no one in hockey history had ever reached or has reached since. What made Jagr so devastating was the paradox of his game. He was a power forward with a playmaker's vision. At 6'2" and 230 pounds, he could shield the puck along the boards like a defenseman, absorbing checks from smaller players who bounced off him like they had hit a wall. But he also possessed the hands of a surgeon and the vision of a point guard. Threading passes through traffic, finding teammates in impossible spaces, and changing the geometry of the offensive zone with every shift. His signature move was the one-on-one dangle. He would protect the puck on his hip, shift his weight, and walk past defenders as if they were standing still. Nobody in the sport could take it from him. Opposing teams tried everything: double coverage, physical intimidation, clutching and grabbing. He scored anyway. From 1997 to 2001, Jagr won 4 consecutive Art Ross trophies. For 2 full decades, from 1981 through 2001, only 3 players won the NHL scoring title: Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, and Jaromir Jagr. That is the company he kept. That is the air he breathed. In 1998, with Penguins captain Ron Francis departing for Carolina, Jagr inherited the captaincy, the 12th man to wear the C in franchise history. That same year, the Nagano Winter Olympics became the first games to feature NHL players. For the Czech Republic, a young nation that had only existed as an independent country since 1993, the tournament was a chance to prove itself on the world stage. Jagr was the centerpiece. He did not merely lead his team, he willed them forward. The Czechs stunned Russia, beat Canada, and defeated the heavily favored Americans and Finns on their way to gold. For Jagr, it was the culmination of a lifelong arc. The boy from the communist state, wearing 68 for a dead grandfather, standing on the Olympic podium while the Czech national anthem played. The city of Kladno gave him an honorary title upon his return. In 1999, Jagr won the Hart Trophy as the NHL's most valuable player. He also won the Lester B. Pearson Award, voted on by the players themselves 3 times. That distinction matters. The men who had to face him every night considered him the most outstanding player in the sport. On December 30th, 1999, he recorded 3 goals and 4 assists for a career-high 7-point night against the New York Islanders. But underneath the dominance, cracks were forming in Pittsburgh. The Penguins were a small-market team drowning in financial problems. Lemieux returned from retirement in 2001, and while having 2 legends on the same roster sounded like a dream, it created friction. Who was the captain? Who was the franchise? The Penguins could not afford both, and on July 11, 2001, Jagr was traded to the Washington Capitals. He signed the largest contract in NHL history at the time, $77 million over 7 years, $11 million per season. And for the first time in his career, things went wrong. The Capitals missed the 2002 playoffs. Jagr failed to finish among the league's top scorers for the first time in his career. For the first time, he did not make the All-Star team. The swagger that had defined him in Pittsburgh evaporated in Washington's dysfunctional locker room. He managed a 77-point season in 2003 and dragged the Capitals to the postseason. But it was a far cry from the dominance hockey had come to expect. In 2004, Jagr was traded to the New York Rangers, a franchise that had missed the playoffs for 7 consecutive years and was desperate for a savior. Jagr delivered. In his first full season in New York, after the 2004 to 2005 lockout, he scored 54 goals and 123 points, finishing second in the league and earning first-team All-Star honors at 33 years old. He was named the Rangers' 24th captain, replacing the retired Mark Messier. On November 19, 2006, he scored his 600th career NHL goal. On February 10, 2007, he recorded his 1,500th career point. Only the 12th player in history to reach that mark, and the 4th fastest to do so behind Marcel Dion, Mario Lemieux, and Wayne Gretzky. He also tied Mike Gartner's NHL record by scoring 30 or more goals in 15 consecutive seasons, a streak that had begun in his second year in the league and extended through nearly the entirety of his prime. The Rangers made the playoffs in 2 of his 3 seasons, but could not advance past the conference semi-finals. After the 2007 to 2008 season, at 36 years old, Jagr left the NHL. In 2008, at 36 years old, Jagr walked away from the NHL and signed with Avangard Omsk in Russia's Continental Hockey League. He spent 3 productive seasons there. Most of the hockey world assumed his NHL career was finished. At 39, with 3 years away from the best league on earth, a comeback seemed physically impossible. They did not know Jaromir Jagr. In 2011, he returned to the NHL and signed with the Philadelphia Flyers. He put up 54 points in 73 games, was nominated for the Masterton Trophy for perseverance, and helped the Flyers upset his former Pittsburgh Penguins in the first round of the playoffs. At 39, he was not just surviving in the NHL, he was thriving. What followed was a 7-year victory lap that defied every biological law. He played for Dallas, then was traded to Boston at the deadline. With the Bruins, he became a missing piece on a team that reached the 2013 Stanley Cup final against Chicago, making Jagr the only player in NHL history to appear in the Cup final as both a teenager and a man over 40. The Bruins lost to the Blackhawks in 6 games, but Jagr's presence in a championship 21 years after his last one was staggering. He then signed with New Jersey, where general manager Lou Lamoriello, famous for forbidding any jersey number higher than 35, granted Jagr a special exception to keep wearing 68. He led the Devils in scoring at age 42. He moved to Florida, led the Panthers in scoring at age 44, and became one of the most beloved players in franchise history. His final NHL stop was Calgary, where a fan club called the Traveling Jaggers, a group of Alberta hockey fans who dressed in the jerseys and wigs of all 11 teams he represented, followed him from rink to rink like a mullet-wearing pilgrimage. The longevity numbers are not just impressive, they are absurd. Jagr scored 283 points after turning 40, 16 more than Gordie Howe, who held the previous record. Only 15% of active NHL players, at the time of his departure, had more career points than Jagr had scored after his 40th birthday alone. He was the oldest player to lead his team in scoring twice, once at 42 with the Devils, once at 44 with the Panthers. He became the first player to score a goal in 53 different NHL arenas. When he finally left the NHL, he returned to Kladno, the same club where he had played as a 15-year-old. The club his father had rescued from bankruptcy during the turbulent transition from communism to a market economy. The club Jagr had owned since his father transferred control to him in 2011. He kept playing through his late 40s into his 50s. His father, also named Jaromir, died in 2022, deepening Jagr's sense of obligation to the club that bore his family's name and history. Teammate Jaromir Pitlick described Jagr's dedication in terms that bordered on disbelief. "When I leave the arena after the morning training, he's the last one to leave. And when I arrive in the afternoon, he's already there. Sometimes I think he must sleep there." Former NHL forward Michael Frolik, who played alongside Jagr at Kladno, called his commitment unbelievable and said it was invaluable for younger players to watch the daily habits of one of the greatest to ever play. At 54, in the 2025-26 season, Jagr was still taking shifts for Kladno in the Czech Extraliga, having completed his 37th professional season. When asked why he continued, his answer was characteristically blunt. "I have a responsibility to the club. If I quit, the partners and sponsors would leave, and the club may be done. I have no choice." On February 18, 2024, the Pittsburgh Penguins retired Jagr's number 68 in a ceremony at PPG Paints Arena. He became just the 3rd player in franchise history, after Lemieux and Michel Briere, to receive the honor. Active Penguins players wore throwback number 68 jerseys during warm-ups. The Traveling Jagrs, a famous fan club from Alberta, whose members dressed in the jerseys of all 11 teams Jagr represented throughout his career, complete with flowing black wigs, made the trip one final time. As Jagr's banner rose to the rafters in Pittsburgh, a circle closed. The teenager who had arrived from behind the Iron Curtain, speaking no English, who had been lonely and homesick in a split-level suburban house, who had won 2 cups before he could legally drink in America. That kid now had his number hanging alongside the greatest player the franchise had ever produced. In March of 2026, Jagr told NHL.com that his professional playing career was likely over. He had sold 80% of his ownership stake in Kladno in early 2025, retaining a minority share. In October of 2025, he had published an autobiography titled J68, which offered insight into his life, faith, career, and the meaning of sport. The book included previously unpublished photographs and reflections on 4 decades of professional hockey. "I had my time, my turn," he said. "I want to say thanks to the NHL. They made me what I am right now. I appreciate it. I was so lucky. I had a great run. That was a great life." Consider the full sweep of Jaromir Jagr's life. Born under communist rule in a small Czech industrial city, named after a grandfather who died in a political prison, grew up keeping photographs of Ronald Reagan as an act of defiance, became the first Czechoslovak player drafted without defecting, won 2 Stanley Cups as a teenager alongside Mario Lemieux, became the greatest right winger in the history of hockey, led his country to Olympic gold, won 5 scoring titles, left the NHL, came back, left again, came back again, played professionally into his 54th year, owned the team, played for the team, refused to stop. The through line of Jagr's career is not talent, though he had more of it than almost anyone. It is an almost pathological refusal to let anything, age, injuries, politics, geography, expectations, tell him when to stop. He played in the era of Gretzky and Lemieux and held his own. He played in the era of Crosby and Ovechkin and still produced. He outlasted entire generations of players. Teammates who were born after his NHL debut were retired before he was. Where does Jagr rank among the greatest hockey players of all time? The answer depends entirely on how much weight you give to longevity versus peak dominance. At his peak, from 1995 through 2001, Jagr was arguably the most dominant offensive player in the sport. 5 scoring titles in 7 seasons. A 149-point campaign that set records for his position that still stand. An MVP trophy. 3 Pearson Awards from the players themselves. During that stretch, he had 314 goals and 760 points in 495 games. 23.6% more points than the second-place finisher, Teemu Selänne. That is not a slight edge, that is a canyon. Gretzky is the greatest of all time, and no serious person argues otherwise. His records exist in a realm that borders on fiction. Lemieux, if not for cancer and back injuries, might have challenged Gretzky. Gordie Howe defined the sport for 3 decades. Bobby Orr revolutionized it. But after those 4, the conversation opens wide, and Jagr has aegis that nobody else can match. He is second all-time in points, third in goals, fourth in games played, first in game-winning goals. He is a member of the Triple Gold Club, Stanley Cup, World Championship, Olympic gold. He won in the 90s with Pittsburgh, competed in the 2000s with the Rangers, and was still dangerous in his 40s with New Jersey, Florida, and Boston. No other player in hockey history combined peak scoring dominance with the kind of longevity Jagr displayed. Howe played until 52, but his final NHL seasons were largely ceremonial. Jagr was leading his team in scoring at 44. He was reaching the Stanley Cup final at 41. He was a productive, meaningful player into his mid-40s in a league that discards most players before they hit 35. If greatness is measured by who scored more, who lasted longer, and who adapted more relentlessly, then after Gretzky and Lemieux, there is Jaromir Jagr. And then there is everyone else. He never won another cup after '92, and that is the one legitimate knock on his resume. But he reached the final again 21 years later, at 41 years old, with a roster he had joined just weeks before the playoffs. He competed at the highest level of professional hockey across 5 different decades. He is the only player to appear in the Stanley Cup final both as a teenager and past the age of 40. That is not just a career, that is a geological era of dominance. He wore 68 for a grandfather he never met, played for a country that once tried to own him, and refused to stop long after every reasonable voice told him to. Jaromir Jagr was not just a hockey player. He was a statement, written in goals, assists, and decades, that nothing and no one gets to decide when you are finished except you. If you want to see the full story of the Czech Republic's golden moment at the 1998 Nagano Olympics, the night a nation born from revolution beat the hockey world, check out our deep dive. Link in the description. Subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.